Hello everyone, and now we are moving into the Rococo period. Once again, the pendulum is swinging from, the serious to the silly, and from the Mannerist style to the Baroque period, there's a strong contrast. The strong contrast is here once again in the Rococo period. To use more modern terms, you could think of the Baroque as the heavy drama, whereas the Rococo would be the comedy, frivolous, light-hearted, full of pastels and ornate decorations. This was art made for rich people, not for the church, not for the king per se, but for those with money. And at this time, obviously, Europe was, as I've said before, raping the new worlds and exploring and finding new places, new treasures, new things to bring back. Well, the most in-fashion place now would be China, leading to a new word, Chanassery, things from China, which is why you would see a pagoda in the middle of a traditional English garden, or you might see a statue of Buddha next to statues of the classical figures that you would find on the mantle of someone else. All of this is adding to the language, the potential visual language of artists, and obviously Chanassery is going to have a strong influence on artists at this time, as well as shifting from the cross and the crown. The focus of taste is not necessarily the royal court or the cathedral. Now we see a focus to the private, the salon or the hotel, like in Paris. The main powers to be aware of course, are the cultural capital of Paris. Prussia, of course, is growing in power. The Netherlands and the North, they're still trading, exploring, and bringing back and trading. Those are things to be aware of. The great race now is for knowledge. We're entering the age of enlightenment, and this is going to have a profound impact on artists. This search for knowledge is going to shape how artists see light, how artists see texture, and it's really a profound step. And I say profound a lot. You guys get used to it, but I really mean it. So science is playing a strong role. The changing coins and hands is playing a strong role, but even more so is philosophy. John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The contract between man was not just between man and government. No, that's not the contract. The contract is between people and themselves. That's the true contract and the true moral obligation that we have. Now, what does that have to do with art? You're going to find out. Because obviously, the Academy is still strong, Paris is still strong, and the influence of Paris and the Parisian Academy is permeating all of Europe, dictating how art is made, what art is made, and who it is made for. And these ideas will trickle forth from Europe to the Americas and elsewhere. We're almost through all of this boring history, but it's all incredibly important. See, the Age of Enlightenment was not just science and philosophy. These things affected images as well. Irony, satire, drama, the changing nature of literature and thinking influenced those images. And so for the first time in the history of art, art is now sarcastic. Whereas before it was meant to describe, this is an apple. It was meant to glorify, here is our Lord Almighty. It was meant to illustrate, educate, or decorate. Here now, art can say something about society. Here's our first painting, Antoine Watteau's Pilgrimage to Cythera. Now, to understand this painting, it's probably easier if you think about it in something you can relate to, and I imagine some of you probably went on a long drive to go on vacation. A long drive that took 5 to 10 hours. It was an incredible vacation. You're driving back, and about 1 hour from home, 1 hour you start thinking, I need to wash clothes, I need to get the mail, I need to pick up the dog. Ugh. Reality is starting to set in, and the memory that was that vacation becomes hazy like a dream. The same thing is happening here in the Pilgrimage to Cythera. through color and through that clever tool that we think of as atmospheric perspective. In the foreground, people are still enjoying Cythera, the bacchanalian orgy, the drinking, the partying, like the Greeks of old. As we move down that hill, notice that the colors become desaturated, less intense. You know, here on Cythera, they're not thinking about reality. Reality is this little speck. Notice how the colors of the people, the intensity of the people changes as they walk down the hill. Those that have come to Cythera are truly enjoying life and being in that moment, as those that are even farther away, they're so detached from that moment, that intensity. Just like you guys on vacation. When you're on vacation, for the most part, we usually don't think about bills, laundry, taxes, and all that other boring stuff. We're trying to enjoy free drinks, or trying to find out who that person is at the end of the bar. We're trying to enjoy life. The same thing is happening here. And color, interestingly enough, is being used to help support that idea. If you want to look at it in a more literal fashion, look at the focus. In the foreground, everything has a sharp texture, and then as we proceed back, it becomes more and more hazy, like a dream. So there is Pilgrimage to Cythera. When you compare this painting to the serious, heavy, dark, theatrical scenes, the dramatic scenes, the Baroque, you have that clear counterpoint. So hopefully that makes sense. Next, we have a painting purely made for for a rich white person with a lot of money to do, a lot of money and a lot of time to do whatever he wants. It doesn't necessarily have to be a white person, but you know, so often we don't see people of color or these different ethnicities. We have to look at, you know, the art that's being brought over. And I also use that phrase to get your attention, because I know a lot of you guys will sleep through these videos. Getting to the point, what do we have here? We have rich people frolicking, we have servants helping the rich people, and we have a man in the bushes trying to sneak a peek up the dress of his lover. You will see that there is a classical element in the top left and the bottom right. The cherubs, the putti, are bearing witness and inspiring the situation. Throughout the entire scene, you have the rich, beautiful, luxurious, delicious textures of the Rococo period. The heavy darks, the serious, somber darks of the Baroque are lost, and now pastel colors, pastel light, dreamy, frivolous scenes are what dominate this period, and you can see that here in the swing. Could you say that there is more to it? I'm sure you could. Many people spend their life trying to find meaning in the work of any number of artists. But here it's simply a woman on a swing, a servant pulling her back and forth, and the man who had the painting made admiring the woman. If you read the text, you will find out there's a small paragraph where it says, part of the woman's dress alludes to a piece of the female anatomy. We don't have to worry about that. While that interpretation is, of course, there, you could see the male and female anatomy in the piece. It is not required. It's not a foundation of enjoyment or understanding. It's simply just another facet, another interpretation. And then, as I've said so many times before, there's always an exception. And here we have that in Adelaide Guiard. We have a painting by a woman, of a woman, but is it for a woman? Think about it. Sofonisba Anguissola, she painted not naked frolicking. Gentileschi didn't paint naked frolicking. Catarina van Hemsen didn't paint the frivolousness of her time. She was painting somber, straightforward, serious paintings, trying to recreate life and show her talent. Adelaide Guiard does the same thing here, but takes it forward a step. Obviously, it is a man's world, and in the background she has a sculpture of her father's bust. She has a bust of her father. This kind of speaks to her past, the classics teaching her. But here, she looks at us confidently, maturely. She acknowledges us, but she is busy painting. And her you wouldn't necessarily say her disciples, but her adoring students admire her work, and one of them acknowledges us, breaking the fourth wall. When you see this, you cannot, I mean, you obviously you could deny it, but it's very hard to deny the genius and the gorgeous texture of her dress. Attention to texture is a strong, common thread throughout the entire Rococo period. You can see the dress, you can see her, you can see her followers, but there's something else that's being done here. She is making this work not for women, not even for herself, but really, she's making it for men. How is she making it for men? Like I've told you before, acknowledge the body language. Body language says so much. The Greeks did it, the Egyptians did it, kings and queens like Justinian and Theodore, they did it as well. How is she asserting herself? By putting her foot forward. Rather than standing there, she puts her foot forward, but more so, she puts her foot forward on the easel. She plants it down. This is mine. I'm not just posing. I'm not just sitting here looking pretty with a painting. Ooh, look at me, I can paint. No, she's telling you, my father trained me, and now I am just as capable as any other man. It's a profound statement for women at this time, which was still dominated by men. Moving on, we have a court painter, another female, Elizabeth Lebrun, Vigée Lebrun. Here she's painted what we could think of as a Facebook portrait. It is, in fact, Marie Antoinette. You have the delicious textures, the soft attention to detail of the textures, but you have something more. The timeless quality of what it is to be a mother. You know, you have one child fighting for her attention, another child fighting for her love, another child wanting to play, and then you have this memento mori on the right side, memento mori being a reminder of death. The boy here opens the crib, revealing that it is empty, reminding us that Marie, in all of her elegance, has lost a child. For all of her wealth, her power, she is just as human as you. It has the classical additions of the Greek columns. It has the stately elegance of Versailles. You can see the rich textures not only in her dress, but in the cushion, you know, setting her aside as royalty. She is not your average mom, though she has the same concerns as an average mom. She is above you because she has her foot elevated. Her body is elevated. We're almost through. There are not many slides in this chapter. Moving from portraiture, we're going to look at something very different in France, and that is still lifes. Still lifes, according to the French Academy, were the lowest art form that students studied. It was the bottom. It was the foundation. You studied how to paint a jug, a pitcher of water, and then you learned how to paint something more important. Jean-Baptiste Chardin did not elevate those other things. He elevated the presence and the beauty of the simple still life, giving it a presence all on its own. Following more along the lines of those in the Netherlands, with his attention to incredible attention to detail, you almost seem like you're looking at this moment and the person has simply stepped away, is about to return. There's a stillness, a quiet presence that speaks to many. Chardin has been noted as an influence for hundreds of artists since his body of work was made. Moving north to England, we enter the rich tradition now of portraiture. What's really interesting about this painting is not just the portrait, but the handling of the paint. I want you to look at something here. You have, of course, the wonderful attention to texture in the fabric. You have the attention, notice how the attention to detail is strict in the face, but as we move away from the face, the paint becomes very loose. It becomes free. If you take a look at the leaves in this tree, it's very different from what we saw in the Baroque period. Linear exactitudes, the linear detail is not so important. It's more free and expressive, which falls in the line with the French traditions of the Rococo. Comparing some of the other landscapes in France, it falls right in line. From portraiture, now we get our first genuine bombshell. art that is sarcastic, art that has teeth and is saying something more than just this is a beautiful thing. William Hogarth's Marriage a la Mode. So what is this about? Well, you have a man in a chair. He is obviously tired. You can see that he's looking down, his hands are in his pockets. His dog is going, "Hey daddy, what's that? What? What's that? What's that?" And you see that he has this large dark mark on his neck. And those of you not familiar with medicine would know, that was familiar with the time, that would, well, whether at that time or now, that type of mark is common with the sexually transmitted disease syphilis. So compare him and his look with the woman on the opposite side. Clearly this is the family that owns this house. She has a very different look on her face, and she doesn't look like she's been partying with him, because she doesn't look so tired. She looks refreshed. She looks awake, alive, in the moment. And if you look at her face, she clearly has something in her mind, like, "I know something you don't." What does she have in her hand? What is she holding? And do women from that time really sit with their legs that far apart? What's happening? The servant in the background is wiping his forehead from sweat. The servant in the foreground is raising his hand either to God or to someone to give him strength for dealing with these two people. He's like, "This family's crazy, I've got to find a better job." In the foreground on the floor, we have a table, well no, sorry, we have a chair that's turned over, we have a violin case that's closed, and one violin case that's partially open. We have a music book that's opened, but it doesn't look like the other violin was opened up. So could it be the violin teacher that's not here now was not able to teach his lesson? What did the violin teacher do with this woman? Obviously, you're all adults. I think you can imagine what was happening here. The wife was cheating on the husband, and of course the husband was cheating on the wife. But, okay, so that's the scene with the family, but look at what's happening here. He's comparing these two moments with the two rooms. In the back room, the family room, which is more common, you have the chinoiserie, you have the classical stuff, you have the more sexy, hip, cool things here, because this is where they really live. Compare that with the back room. The back room is orderly, classical, with these very elegant paintings where they entertain guests. So on the outside, they're a dignified, incredibly respectable couple. But in reality, their marriage is a joke. Marriage a la mode. That's the name of the painting, and that is, part of the statement that Hogarth is making. Satire is a new weapon for expression. Satire was not really thought of before. Obviously, people could complain about a king, they could complain about, someone, but to make a sarcastic joke, to be sarcastic in art, was really unheard of. So it's really a great leap forward. In the realm of architecture, to be Rococo is to be ornate, gaudy, incredibly loaded with decoration. Rococo architecture, it's very hard sometimes to find where the building starts and the decoration begins, or to find where the decoration stops and the building begins. When we look at the Zwanger or the Wieskirche, we can see that here. The columns, obviously they have capitals, but capitals that big are really quite ludicrous. When you look at this part by Balthasar Neumann, what you need to be aware of is the balustrade. Balustrade is the railing, the banister, the railing that goes down the stairs, the decorations on top of it. It's like, "Yo, dog, I heard you like sculptures, so I put sculptures everywhere. Every 10 centimeters, here's a sculpture, sculpture, sculpture." Perhaps it's most easily seen here in the Wieskirche, the church, the meadow. Well, let's look at this up close. Sorry, not him. That's Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Where's the Wieskirche? This is another view Uh, this is where the pulpit normally is. I know in Arkansas, in typical Judeo-Christian churches, the focus of the congregation is at the end by the altar. That is not always the case in European churches. The end of the church, or the apse, if you remember the term, is where the altarpiece would be. It would be a place of focus of faith, but not necessarily where the priest would be. Sometimes the priest would be above the flock. Sometimes he would be in the middle of the flock preaching out while you would focus your attention forward at images of faith. And when you look at this space, it's very difficult. Well, I mean, obviously if you take time you can see it, but it's difficult to pick out where the decoration starts or stops. You can see the golds, the pinks, all of the decorations carrying forth from the ceiling down to the altar itself, and those colors echoing throughout the entire church. This is not your Gothic cathedral. This is not your Byzantine church. You can see some repetition of that with the colored marble, things taken from far and wide to decorate the interior of this space. I wanted you to see a picture like this to understand just how big it is and just how intimate a space it is. Let's see, do I have another picture of it? I thought I did. Well, there's that one. We'll zoom in some. It's a little hard to read, but you can see it here. So imagine if you would, how it would feel to sit before this space. On the outside, dreary, cloudy, rainy. On the inside, you see gold. You can see the fire catching the different sides of the gold in the building, the luxurious decoration. It becomes a metaphor for heaven. It becomes a metaphor for salvation. While you may be poor, while you may be drab or dreary, you may have a rich spiritual center. That's part of the message or the branding of the church. It is clever and it is glorious to see such decoration. Now, was all of the art like this? No. As I said before, in the Baroque chapter, now that we don't have any other dark ages between the one dark age and now, man has had several different periods or styles of art that they can pick from, like a buffet or like toppings on a pizza. Then, which has brought about a classical revival. Classicism. Later, it will become neoclassicism. Artists, just because Rococo was popular doesn't mean it's the only style. Maybe someone wants a Greek-looking building, which is why Lord Burlington had his Villa Rotunda. The Villa Rotunda, which very much looks like a combination of Greek and Roman elements. You have the gabled roof, you have the freestanding columns, but you have the rotunda and you have the Roman elements added to it. Chiswick House is a great example of that classical revival. Meanwhile, on the inside, we have a Roman villa, which looks very much like, the Villa of Mysteries, or one of the many villas we saw when looking at Pompeii. The multicolored marble, the false facades, the decorations which speak to the pagan classics. This is very much a Roman-influenced room. Meanwhile, across, you might have a Gothic revival like at Strawberry Hill. The parapets, the lancet windows, the heavy towers, the heavy buildings, and the buttresses that we associate so strongly with the Gothic period. So, while Rococo is in vogue, it is not the de facto, the one style. Classicism here speaks to the idea behind classicism is that the classical is universal, it is timeless, it is not locked to a single period, in contrast to Baroque, Rococo, or Mannerists. That can be seen here in Cornelia pointing to her children as her treasures. The story is pretty simple, and the story is actually really timeless. And some of you might have a friend that's like this. On the one hand, you have Cornelia. Cornelia with her 3 children. Say on the left side, well, Reggie, he won the spelling bee, and Timothy, he's about to go to magnet school. He's done really good on his tests, And Lydia, she's got all of her numbers up to 100 now. I'm just so proud of my children. Compare that with the other woman. She has no children, she simply has jewelry. So, what is more important? The statement here is pretty clear. While the one woman presents the gold necklaces and finery, Cornelia presents her children as her true treasures. She is rich because of her children. Now, that is a situation that could happen in the 18th century, in the 12th century, in any century. The idea here is that by putting them in classical dress, they speak to a timeless classical idea. If they were to wear dress that was associated with the 18th century, it would be only for that moment. But by putting them in the classical dress, they make a broader classical universal statement. We'll take another look at a piece that is classical, that is fighting that fight between being classical and modern or contemporary for that time. We can see that here in The Death of General Wolfe. Many of Benjamin West's contemporaries wanted him to put the soldiers and the fallen general in togas to make them look like Roman or Greek soldiers. West did not want to do that, so he used the redcoats. He used the dress for that time. So now Benjamin West's Death of General Wolfe, not Jennifer Wolfe, General Wolfe is locked to that specific moment. The one timeless, or rather the one classical thing that can be seen here, is in the pose of his first tribe assistant. This man here sits in the classical pose of mourning. Excuse me. I realize that might sound a little crazy for you guys, but again, that goes back to the Academy. The Academy said art must be made in this way. Great art is made this way. It is made about these things. You use this material, use this pose, and this is who it's for. And according to the academic tradition, this was a classical pose of reflection, of thought. And here, while it looks like he's pretty happy, he is, by his pose, mourning the death of the General Wolfe. Meanwhile, in the background, soldiers fight and cajole and toss and turn and lean and fall, and the rest of the men focus all of their attention towards their fallen leader. So there's one last piece. Obviously, we're approaching America now, and there's one great American that kind of straddles the line between Europe and the colonies. That is John Singleton Copley. Copley, who was born and raised part of his life in the colonies, eventually traveled to England. And so think about the couture effect that I've mentioned to you before. Baroque becomes popular. Baroque spreads around the world, and it finally hits the colonies, but by the time it crosses the ocean and gets to the colonies, Baroque is no longer in fashion, and Rococo is the new thing. So he has this Baroque experience, this Baroque taste. He moves to England, and he learns about the Rococo. And so we have this wonderful synthesis of Baroque and Rococo sentiments in his portrait of Paul Revere. Yes, this is Paul Revere. I'm not talking about the song, I'm talking about the man. A known silversmith, a very talented silversmith, whose work you can actually still buy. You'll sometimes see his work on Antiques Roadshow. He was a very talented metalsmith. You see the attention to texture. You can see the attention to the texture of his cloth and in his fine work, but you see the dramatic, heavy lighting that we typically associate with the Baroque. You see the use of chiaroscuro in his face and in his hands. So Copley here kind of blends those two periods together and presents really an interesting piece that breaks away from the pastel, the lighthearted, this somewhat playful nature of the French Rococo. So that's the end of this lecture. As always, you can drop by my office, email me, leave a message on the phone. Don't forget, you can copy my text notes in the textbook, or download the PowerPoint for more information. I hope this helps, and I wish you all the best of luck. See you in class.